Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Farnham, Community Manager here at Odoo San Francisco, and today joining me is resident expert at Odoo, Brett Heidemann, here to talk about Odoo Studio. Thanks so much for joining us, Brett.
Absolutely, yeah. So today's webinar, like a lot of them, is going to take about 30 to 40 minutes or so of actual demo, and then we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for a Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brett. And if this is your first time joining us for the webinars, just to let you know, if you have any questions throughout, just pump them into the chat box to the right, and we'll be answering them throughout, or saving them for the end during the Q&A session, as Brett mentioned. If you like this video, be sure to hit subscribe down below and like. And if you have any additional questions, maybe some suggestions for webinar topics in the future, please send any inquiries to webinars@odoo.com. And most importantly, if you want to talk to Brett directly, you can schedule a meeting with him, and his calendar link is in the description of the webinar at the YouTube thing. So without further ado, I guess let's get going. Thanks so much, Brett, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Todd. And I just want to say thank you for always managing these webinars. We really appreciate it here.
Of course.
Today we're going to be talking about Odoo Studio. It is a complex app, and it's a very unique app. It's not like any of the other ones that we have necessarily. There's a lot to talk about. The goal here today is to kind of give you an overview, and it's not exactly going to be super technical, but it's going to be technical enough to the point where you should get a pretty good idea of what you can do with it. So Todd, do you want to go ahead and switch over to my slides?
Yep.
Okay.
Already on.
It's already on. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm a business advisor here, and just to give my spiel about who I am and what I do, basically my role here as an advisor in San Francisco is that I help people out that are interested in pursuing Odoo and seeing if it's going to work for them. I can answer questions about it. I can walk you through a personalized demo. And a lot of times during a personalized demo, what we might do is I might create a new trial database and then work on it, set it up a little bit, go through some configuration, add some data, and then hand it over to you who are evaluating it. And then you can work on it for a couple of weeks and see if Odoo is going to be a good fit. And all throughout that process, I'll be the main point of contact for that. So that's what I do, me and my other colleagues here. There's quite a few of us business advisors here in San Francisco and a few in New York also. If you want to reach out and have a conversation, Studio in particular is one that definitely lends itself to having a personalized conversation because it's all about being creative, and it's all about making new configurations that don't already exist. So a lot of times you're going to need some help. If you want to do that, you can actually just schedule a demo. I've got my link up here. You should be able to see it. It's www.odoo.com/r/Brett. And also, you can go ahead and you'll see it in saved when this actually goes up as a video. But yeah, enough about me. Let's go ahead and get into Studio itself. So today's agenda, what we're going to go over today, we're going to cover what is Odoo Studio first. We're going to explain what's the purpose of it, why did we create it, and what does it kind of look like in relation to the rest of Odoo. That's going to be very brief. Then we're going to actually get into it. First, I'm going to show you the basics of just making changes to things that are already there. We're not going to add anything new at first. I'm just going to show you how you can change fields, how you can customize the views, and how you can modify menus in different modules and apps using Odoo Studio. Next, we're going to actually start creating some new content. I'm going to show how to make new fields, and also, possibly more importantly, new connections between the different apps. Then after that, we're going to use the tools that we've already kind of covered, and we're going to build a whole new app from scratch. And finally, just very briefly, I'm going to kind of discuss and comment on some of the other associated miscellaneous tools like access controls, automations, and reports. Okay, so without further ado, let's go into step one. What is Odoo Studio exactly? So basically, Odoo Studio is a tool that is currently, I'm sure people are going to ask this, it's currently only available for the full version of Odoo, either online or self-hosting, but it's the full version, or odoo.sh. Not available for Odoo Community. I don't think it will be added in the foreseeable future. I haven't heard any plans to add that, so that is probably useful to know. But it is a tool, it's an app that you can install onto your dashboard that will basically allow you to customize. It's, like I said, a series of different tools. It's a bunch of different customization options. And the whole goal is that it's going to add functionality that you need specifically within the different Odoo apps. It's going to allow you, like I had mentioned in the agenda, to make your own Odoo apps from scratch. Some people get confused when they hear about Studio and they think it's a way to create any app you want and sell it on like the marketplace on the Apple Store or something like that. It's not that kind of app. It's an Odoo app. It's a business module or app that goes within the Odoo platform. But you can make it from scratch. You can either start completely from scratch or you can build off of existing data that's already in Odoo. And the whole idea behind it is to give you a means to develop and add these customizations without necessarily having to use any code, without having to actually know Python, for example. It doesn't hurt, but we want to put as much control into your hands as possible without you needing to be an advanced developer. And so Odoo Studio, what does it look like? It's basically, maybe you've seen it before, it's this kind of dark gray / black interface that gets added whenever you toggle it on and off, and it has a series of different controls and tools like we talked about. I'll go ahead and jump in real quick to a demo database, this one right here, just to show how to activate it. First off, if you're in any app, like Contacts for example, you can go ahead and toggle this button. That's Odoo Studio. As soon as you toggle it, it does change the interface. And as you can see, there's some options over here. For one thing, you'll have the ability to add new content, fields. We'll get into that in great detail later. You can modify a few things with the view, and if you click on, say, a particular bit of data, like the an actual contact record real quick, you can go ahead and you can modify some of the properties of a particular field, for example. You have that ability right over here. In addition to modifying fields and adding new fields, over here you'll have a menu bar with associated tools as well. You can also modify the menus. That's just a brief overview of what the interface looks like. We'll get into the specifics of everything in just a little bit. Yeah, Studio, it's a tool. It's an app, technically, that you install, but it doesn't show up on the main dashboard exactly. It's just that little icon that pops up that looks like a little wrench for the pencil. So let's go ahead and actually get into working with it and using it and learning how it operates. First off, I just want to work with existing content. I'm going to make some changes to content that's already in there. We're going to go through fields, views, and menus. And so first, fields. So with Odoo Studio, you can take any field that's already in there. We're talking about the name, the email, phone, whatever it is, and you can work with those and make some changes. You can change the labels of it. You can also change things about it, like how they operate. You can change if the field is required or not, and you can change if the field is invisible or readable or not, based on certain conditions. And so what I mean by that, we'll go into it. I'm going to go ahead and jump into specifically the contact record. I think that's a good place to mess around with these things. If I wanted to, I could open up any contact, and I can go ahead and customize it. If I open up Studio while I'm viewing the contact record, for whatever reason, I might want to change these things. Instead of title, for example, maybe it's normal to refer to it as job position. So to make that minor change, you click on the field, and then over here is label. That's what it displays as. You go ahead and you call it job position and close it. There's no save button. You basically just close, and then the change takes effect. In some cases, depending on what it is that you're doing, you might have to do a hard refresh after you've made the change for it to take effect. So I'm doing a refresh real quick, and there it is. It is now called job position. That is the simplest form of thing that you can do with Odoo Studio. It's just changing a label that's already in here. And it's any kind of field, really. You can change the names of tabs. You could change the names of these smart buttons up at the top, and so on and so forth. But it is an instantaneous, and it is a universal change. As soon as I changed it on this record that I used, you'll see that any contact here has that change here. It's job position. It's immediate. So that's very easy to do and very easy to understand. That's just changing the label. Now, as far as changing some of the other factors involving that, you might want to make a field required or not. So, for example, if I toggle that again, maybe you want to make it so that you don't have any contacts that don't have an email. And to do that, you click on this field, and you can change this right here. If I want to, I can make this a required field, basically. And now, if I try to save a record, if I try to make a new contact, for example, like this one right here, Tim. It won't let me save it unless I've entered an email because I just made that existing field required now. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a field there, tim@gmail.com, and save it, and now it will work. So that's very simple. You can make it required, basically. And then similarly, if you want to, we might want to make certain fields only appear based on certain conditions. So if I click on language right here, I can make this one basically invisible. And you can do it based on certain conditions. So if I say, I want this field to not appear unless certain conditions are met, you might say that I only want this field to show up if it has a company. I don't know why you would do that, but you could do that. So you could say that I want this particular field to be invisible unless it is a company, right here is a company is set to true. That's one example of it. You're basically taking a particular criteria and you're choosing whether it's true or not true, contains something like that. So I'm going to save that. So now I basically, this field, it's going to be invisible if it's set to, if it is a company. So in other words, the effect here is that if it's just a regular contact that's not a company, you'll see this field called language. But if I have another company or contact field like Google, which is a company, it doesn't appear. So to recap real quick, you can change the names of fields, and then you can change some of their properties, like are they required or not? Are they invisible based on certain conditions? Or are they read-only, also based on certain conditions? And that's the gist of it. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. But yeah, that's making manipulations to existing fields. Getting back to it, other things you can do with existing data in here, you can change the different views. And to understand that, I think it's good to get maybe a rundown of what kind of views there are in Odoo already. There are general views, that's the form view and search view. There are multi-record views, so there's the Kanban view that you might be familiar with where it's different icons, list view, and then grid view. List is when you're seeing a bunch of different records just listed out and you can sort them based on the column headers. And then grid is sort of like timesheets. When you're looking at your timesheets, it shows up in a grid. I'll show these just for a refresher in a second. There's also scheduling views, where if it's related to date and time, you might see it in calendar view, or you might see it in Gantt chart view, which you'll see in things like manufacturing or in project, where you're allocating resources. And then finally, report views. You can do it based in graphical view, like pie chart, bar graph, line graph, or pivot, which is sort of that Excel readily exportable view. So basically, we have all these different view types in Odoo, and with Odoo Studio, you get to kind of choose which views apply to which kind of data that you're looking at. So if I jump back into that demo database and I'm looking at my contact records, by default right now, we see the Kanban view, which is icon-based. It's this kind of visual-based view. And there's list view. That's what's activated right now. But if I wanted to, I could click Odoo Studio and say maybe I also want to enable a new view for, let's say, graphical. I'll include that. And now that I've changed or enabled that, now you have another option. If I click graphical, you might want to group it by country. And now I'm seeing a graphical view of my contacts that wasn't there before that shows me I have 4 contacts in Canada, I have 4 in Mexico, 4 in the United States, and of course if I wanted to I could view it in different graphical views. So I just enabled a new view. It's the same data, it's already there, it's just you can go ahead and enable that. So yeah, just to revisit that, you can enable any of these views. Form view, once again, is basically if you're just looking at a record, like if I have a contact open, that's form view right there. Very standard in Odoo. That's the basic unit of Odoo data, basically. Then there's also, if you're going to look at search, that actually modifies the search criteria. So when you're doing a search, this is where you go to choose the different fields that'll pop up when you're searching. And also auto-completion fields, pretty useful there. If you want to add other things where, if you start typing, it's going to zero it in by email, for example, you can add that through Odoo Studio. Other views, you can go ahead and, the Kanban view is the icon one, which I already explained, list view. Grid, specifically, it doesn't always pertain to most cases, but it's what we use for timesheets. So if you're looking at timesheet, this is a grid view, basically. So certain types of data, you can enable a grid view for it. And then in addition to that, we also have the graphical views that we already saw, pivot views for exporting spreadsheets, and then calendar and Gantt chart view, which are other options that you might be able to enable. If you're going to enable a calendar view, you do need to have some sort of dates to refer to, because it's going to ask you to enter that. So basically, you can enable different views. And finally, you can, using existing data, you can just manipulate the different menus in Odoo. Things that you could do are rename and rearrange menu items. You can remove and delete menu items. And then also you can create new menu items. And so what I mean by that is if we jump back over to here, and I'm looking at my, say, contacts, you might want to go ahead and toggle Studio and change the menu. By default, the menu is showing us contacts, it's showing us configuration settings, but if you want to, you can click Edit Menu with Odoo Studio, and it'll show you all the menu items kind of grouped up like here. Anything that's a sub-menu of something else is going to be nestled within it, basically. So if you want to, you can go ahead and rename things. Maybe instead of sectors of activity, for example, you might want to just rename it Industry. And now it's going to appear on the menu as Industry. And then you might want to move things around, move it to a different location, maybe make it more readily available or make it its own menu item. And then in addition to that, if it's something that you never want your users to even access because it's cluttering things up, you can remove it and delete that, and so on and so forth. Pretty straightforward stuff. As soon as you confirm it and close, you'll see that the changes should take effect. So there's Industry now. We have that menu item. You can manipulate that. Now, as far as creating new menu items, you can do it, but it kind of is going to get into the next section of this this webinar, which is creating new content, because it's going to get into actual talking about models. So if I wanted to, I could create a new menu item that's going to show up here for, say, I don't know, languages, let's just say, and you can actually choose the model that you're drawing from. But I should point out that this is getting a little bit more technical, and so we'll get into that in greater detail in a second. But you can create a menu item right here and basically add new content that wasn't already there in the context module. Now I have a link to all my languages basically in context, and that wasn't there before. So that's a summary of working with existing fields, existing views, and existing menus to make changes with Studio. So let's get a little bit more involved and more complicated. Let's move into actually adding new content. We're going to start with adding new fields, and I'm going to spend a good amount of time on that because there's a lot to cover. You can add a lot of different field types with Odoo Studio. There's probably more different types of field than you realize, actually. There's simple text fields. There's multi-line text fields where it's kind of like a paragraph form. There's just integers, decimals, or floats, if you will. HTML for embedded HTML of different types. Monetary value fields for dollar amounts and things like that. There's simple date, where it just chooses a day on a calendar. There's date and time, where it chooses the day on the calendar and the time. Simple checkboxes, true, false, yes or no. Drop-down selections, which are really cool, and you actually just choose a few different options, and then somebody will be able to choose from that. Upload a file, and upload a file is really, really powerful actually for any sort of custom manufacturer or custom printer sort of an industry, because if you use it right, you can allow your customers to actually upload a file on the website that will translate back onto, say, a CRM opportunity. And I'll be able to show you that in a little bit. And then there's the relational fields, which we'll get into in just a second. They're pretty involved and very powerful. Upload an image, upload tags, and priority and related. In addition to adding new fields, you can actually choose a bunch of existing fields as well. And I'll explain what we mean by that. It's really powerful, especially for lists. So to kind of demonstrate some of that, let's go in, and I would say I'm going to go ahead and keep working with the contacts because that's a good place to mess around with in Studio. I want to go ahead and show some of the more common types of field. So if I open up a contact record like this one right here, I can go ahead and activate Studio and start adding some new content. I'm going to do a very simple text field. It's just drag and drop. You click it, you drag it in here, and I'm going to call this one a I don't know, customer type or something like that, or customer info, something really generic. That's just a simple text field, and so now it's been added. And once again, in certain cases, you might have to do a hard refresh to have it take effect. The cool thing about this, though, is I've just added this field, and it's going to show up on every record. And you can interact with it, of course, and enter some information. But as soon as I did that, it actually also shows up. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I made the email required. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that, Nestor@gmail, and save that. The cool thing is now that I've added this customer info field, it's actually going to show up in your list view of filtering options. It's actually in here as customer info. So it's universal. It's not just on the contact form itself. It's actually something that you can filter down in and search for, anything like that. I'm going to add a couple more fields to this guy just to show what kind of options there are. I'm also going to add a checkbox, just a simple true false, and I'll just say something like new customer. Maybe you have some option that specifies this is a new customer versus an old customer. So that's just a drop-down selection. I should add that selection fields are really, really helpful for manufacturing operations, and they're really helpful for projects too, because a lot of times if you're working on a project, you might just have a series of tasks that you want your workers to check off as they go. And as you've seen before, you can make this checkbox fields, you can make it invisible depending on what it is. So you might say that this only shows up for certain kind of projects, for example. So there's a lot you can do with that. And then I'm going to show drop-down selection fields because these are really powerful fields. You could just say option 1, option 2, option 3. And now if you now that you've created those different options, you can give the field itself a name, and I'll just say customer type and close that out. I'm going to do a hard refresh here so that some of these labels actually take effect. And now that I've done that, you'll see that we have a drop-down selection field. Instead of just entering text, you click on it and then you choose from an option. Really cool stuff. And so once again, this is extremely useful for a lot of different cases. You can use it for manufacturing. For example, if you want to choose from a list of options of which worker is actually working on something, in some cases, you don't need to have a separate user for every individual manufacturing worker. In certain cases, they can share a user, but then just choose a drop-down selection option to specify which user it was, if that makes sense. It's a way to basically cut down on user costs by just having a traceable, selectable option here. And so, yeah, those are some basic fields that you can. Like I said, you can do a date and time field. You can do a file upload field. We'll get into that in just a second. But in addition to that, I want to explain the existing fields. So existing fields, what that's for, they're fields that already exist in Odoo. We're not making new ones necessarily, but they might not necessarily appear on this contact form already. The most common use for using existing fields is if you want to modify the list view. So if I'm looking at my contacts, I'm looking at it in list view. As you can see, it's pretty simple right now. It's name, it's phone, it's email, and that's it. But depending on what you are doing or looking at a lot, you might want other things in there. So chances are you'll enable Studio from here, and you can modify the list view too and add some existing fields. Let's say I want to show the country that the customer is in. I'll just drag it in there, and bam, there it is. And now it is a sortable, filterable field that you can use when you're looking at list view. So existing fields are really powerful. They have their place. Also in Kanban view too. Kanban view, as you know, is the icon view. If you want to, you can add other things to that icon view. It's pretty limited and simple by now, or by default. But if you want to, you can add an existing field to this and say, I want the country to show up. Actually, it's already there. I want the email to show up, let's say, which is somewhere. Company, customer, email. There's a lot of fields here. Well, in the interest of time, why don't I choose a different one? I'll do, let's just say the phone or something like that. Wow, there's a lot of fields. I can't find any of them. Oh, it's so hard. I'll go ahead and just say, you know, sales order, if that's created. Bam, there's something. Okay, so sometimes it's a matter of finding the fields properly, and you might have to enter them. But yeah, I've just added a new field here, so it's there. So yeah, existing fields, pretty straightforward. In addition to that, and it's a little bit more elaborate, you can make new connections with relational fields. And relational fields, I should explain those types. There's many-to-one fields, and that's the most common one that you would choose. It's kind of like a drop-down selection field, except you're not selecting from new options that you've just created. You're selecting from some list of data that's already in Odoo. So you're selecting one record from a list of many different options. That's what many to one means. One to many, on the other hand, you can select many different options for it, so you can keep on adding new options or selections for it, but they're all going to belong uniquely to that one parent model, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. And then finally, many to many, where you can select many different records, but they're not going to be unique to that parent. So to demonstrate, I would say the many to one field, real quick. I'll go ahead and jump into the database here. I'm going to go into I'm going to add the fleet management tool. Fleet is not necessarily something that gets talked about a whole lot unless it's something that is really critical to your business. But for the people out there that use it, it's really important, and it's really normal to need a lot of customization to it. So I'm going to go ahead and install the fleet management tool here, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new function that isn't already there using a many to one field. If I open up fleet, I'm going to go ahead and add a vehicle real quick. I'll say that I have this this Audi, and I'll give it a license plate. Okay, so this is Odoo Fleet out of the box. And by default, the way it works is that you can assign it to an employee in your company. But let's just say that this is a different kind of business where you're not assigning it to an employee, but instead you're assigning it to a customer. To do that, there's no field there already. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a many to one field. And right there, I'm going to drop it in there. And I'm going to choose the model that you're relating it to. And that's really the important part. In this case, it's contacts, but I'm going to call it, as far as label goes, customer. Okay, now that I've done that, I can go ahead and choose a customer and say this guy. This car is now associated with that contact. And that is a many to one field. Basically, you choose one record from a list of other options. And it's not unique necessarily. I can have another vehicle over here and choose this one real quick. And I can also assign that one to the same guy. But this field, it's a many to one field. We can get into it in greater detail. It's normal to have questions about this kind of a thing, so feel free to reach out and have a discussion with us about it. But very simply put, you can choose one record from a list of many records here. That's many to one, and it's pretty common to do that. Getting back to the other options, though, there is one to many fields, and I'll add one of those next. I should explain that a one to many field is actually already in here. It's these smart buttons. Each one of these is a one to many, which means that there could be many different contracts, there could be many different sale orders or costs, there could be many different services, fuel records, but for any of those, they're all going to be tied directly to just this one parent. So it's kind of a parent-child relationship where you can have many records, but they're only going to be unique to this. You could do it this way, which is the most common way to do it, but you can also just drag in a one-to-many field real quick to show what it looks like in this format. If I do, say, fuel log or something like that and confirm that, we now have a one-to-many field that's listing out the different fuel logs associated just with this record. And if I, to show how it actually relates, I can go ahead and create a fuel log real quick and save it, and it's going to show up immediately in that field. And it's going to update in real time. That's what a one-to-many field is. It's a little bit less common, but you can use it when you're listing out different data for a particular record. And then finally, there's the many-to-many fields, where it is, like I said, it's similar to this in the sense that it's a bunch of different values. You could choose a bunch of records over time, but it's not unique necessarily to this one parent. So I'll choose something like previous customers that have used it, let's say. I'll make a many-to-many field that relates to the contacts, and I'll call it, previous customers. And then you could just sort of list out that you had, 10 different customers over the last 2 years that have used it. It's useful for maybe a rental company, for example, and you can edit it that way. That's a many-to-many field. So this is all really powerful because you're building connections to data elsewhere in the platform. You could basically do relational fields linked to contacts. You could do relational fields linked to repairs, and just combine these apps and make connections that weren't already there for a variety of different use cases. In addition to just doing that sort of connection, I'm also going to go ahead and show how you can do it a two-way link. So you could do a two-way connection by creating a smart button after you've already created that one-to-many field or many-to-one field. So to demonstrate that, now that I have gone and made those fields in Fleet, if I go to the contact record real quick, I can open up this contact right here, and I can make a new smart button that actually links back to the Fleet record. If I click it right here, I'll say vehicles, let's say, and I'll go ahead and choose an icon and choose, let's see, what is it, Fleet. Sometimes you have to open it up because there's so many different fields there, and I'll search for Studio. It'll show you any field that you've created with Studio. That's a quick way to find it. And then I've created that linkage. So now I've created a smart button up at the top, and as you can see, you have a button up here that shows you any vehicles that has been assigned to them. And you can list them out here. So it's a two-way connection. First, I made the many-to-one field on the vehicle record, and I linked it to this guy, and then I made the smart button over here. Any contact now is going to have that smart button. This guy right here, for example, is going to have that. And it's really powerful because from a day-to-day operations perspective, your employees or users, they might get a phone call from a contact like Patrick Patterson, and the guy might say, hi, I'd like to add myself to one of your vehicles, or I would like to assign a vehicle to me. They can actually go from the contact record now and do that. They can click here and, oh, once again, I got to enter the email. Okay, they can go ahead and they can actually click on that smart button and then click create and add a new vehicle directly from that contact. It's a really helpful way to do it because it's automatically going to field that or fill out that field and populate that for them. So when you think about that in terms of all the different apps that we have in Odoo, it's actually really powerful because you can use this for a lot of things. You can use it for repairs, for example. I can make a smart button actually. If we look at repairs, maybe somebody calls in and they have a problem with their equipment, they need you to repair it. You can go ahead and create a repair order and assign it to that customer. And if you want to, for easy access, if I open up that guy that I was just looking at, John, I can actually create a new smart button for repairs too. So you can actually do the same thing where you're just choosing a button up here, you're saying repair orders, and some other icon here, and choose the repair in particular. Search the model and partner ID repair order. There we go. Knowing exactly what model to select and what field to select, oftentimes you might need our help for that. We are happy to answer any questions and guide you through that or do it for you because there are so many different bits of data out there. But as you can see now, we have a linkage for repair orders. So just to summarize, you can create many-to-one relationship fields all over the place in Odoo, but then you can do a two-way connection by making a smart button somewhere on the record. And that way you'll have different ways to access that and share the data back and forth. It's really powerful, especially in practice and especially when you start applying it to your own use cases. And then finally, actually, a new type of connection that we have in version 11 is related fields. Not to be confused with relational fields, but related fields. It's a new thing. And a good example of that is basically you can have a certain field that gets automatically populated for you based on what you choose for another field. A common example is if you choose a customer, there's a field underneath it for email that automatically gets filled out with their email record when you choose them. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that really quick. If I go ahead on the fleet record, that vehicle record that I was talking about earlier, I can go ahead and choose this car, for example, and I can go ahead and add a relation or a related field right underneath customer for that customer's email. The way I do that is I add a related field, put it right underneath here, and I'm going to go first choose what field it's linking to, and I'll say customer. As you can see, it's only allowing me to choose fields that are already on this car's record. I'll choose customer, and then within that, I'll choose the field to pull from the customer record. And in this case, I'll say it's their email, and confirm it. And then, bam, automatically, it should fill in his email. So it's really powerful because you can have a bunch of different related fields that automatically get filled out for your useful information as soon as you select the one field. That's a new option that we chose, and it can get pretty elaborate depending on how many related fields you want populated at any given time. So Now I would say it's a good time to actually build a whole new app and show how you can add full functionality, and it's going to use some of the tools that we've already kind of checked out. So building a whole new app from scratch, it'll show you this kind of user interface. It's a big thing, and it's something that Odoo marketed pretty heavily when Studio first came out. And at the time, me personally, I thought, well, it's kind of helpful, but really the main value of Odoo Studio is adding new fields and modifying what's already there in Odoo. But over this last year, I've actually had a lot of different use cases with customers where it's been really helpful to come up with a custom app and a custom module. And I've started to really see the value in it. It can really improve your functions a lot. And so there's two ways that we can really use this feature. One is if you are making a new app that's going to show up on the dashboard for existing information that's already there in Odoo. Almost as a shortcut, or you might do it because you really want certain users to have access to one specific function, but you only want it to, but you don't want to give them the rest of the access to the rest of it. For example, you don't necessarily want a user to have whole access to inventory, but you do want them to have access to just the list of products. To do that, you might make a dashboard app called Products and use that to just display products. So I'll show you how to do that. It's good for, like I said, a quick shortcut or to really control your user access. To do that, you have to use existing model when you set it up. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. It doesn't take very long at all. I'm just going to go from this dashboard right here. I'll toggle Studio. And as you can see, it's called New App. I'm going to select that. And I'm going to first give it a name. I'll call it Products. It wants you to choose an icon over here in a color scheme. But you can actually change that after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and choose, say, this one. And I'll give it a color there. Now, on this screen, you can give it a first object. And I could say Products. And create it. And then from here, when it opens up, you can actually choose the model that you're looking at by editing the menu. You'd say basically that this, if we add a new menu item, we're going to look at our list of products right here. And confirm that. Okay, great. So now that I've done that, basically you log in and the first thing you see is your different list of products coming directly from inventory. So if I click on that, products, here it is. It's products. It's basically just taking that information from inventory over here, your list of your products. In this case, I only had one. And it is giving you a new dashboard icon just for the products. And that's really useful because, like I said, you can give a user just access to this so they'll have the ability to reference a product catalog when somebody calls on the phone. That's a very simple way of demonstrating it. I should also point out real quick that you can go in and have more control about how it shows up on your dashboard. If you click Edit Menu and edit that, as you can see, you'll have the information for the icon that gets chosen and things like that. I'm not seeing it here right now. Oh, I think I need to actually be in developer mode. That's why. If I'm in developer mode, then I can go ahead and customize the full menu options right there. There it is. Okay, great. So you'll be able to change out the icon. If you go and look at a list of FA icons out there, actually, there are a lot of different, it's short for Font Awesome Icons. You can look through this, find something specifically that you want, and go ahead and enter it. I would go ahead and do, I don't know, shopping basket or something like that. Yeah, let's just say shopping bag and choose that. So you can go ahead and grab that and say shopping bag. And you can change the colors too if you want, but I'll save that and confirm, close it out. And it should actually show up on the dashboard. Yeah, look at that. I just made a new icon right there. Okay, so that's a very simple way of making a new app where you're basically just doing a shortcut to information that's already there. Really popular, and I've been doing it a lot for a lot of my clients recently. But you can also create a new app using your own new model and just start completely from scratch. A good example for that is doing a class or a school or something like that, because we don't already have an app in there, in Odoo, for handling universities. So to do that, there's a lot of different use cases. I'll show the example real quick. this is where a lot of creativity comes into play, and we strongly recommend you use us as a resource to answer questions about it as you do it. But I'll show you the basics real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it can take a lot of time to build a new app, but I'll just say Ski School real quick. As you can see, you can upload your own icon. I will choose this one right here that I already grabbed, and it will show up like so. You'll create a first object name, and I'll just say class, because I'll make it basically when you log in, you'll see your list of classes. I'll create that. And now that you've done that, you can start building it up. Like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can start doing things like build your smart buttons up at the top that link to things like your employees or something like that. You can do related fields to your smart buttons. You can start building the records. You could build tabs down below to actually keep things organized. You might have a tab for your different teachers, a tab for your different events, upcoming, things like that. You could do checkboxes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time building it up because it's pretty straightforward to see, but I will show you the finished product that I made the other day when I did this, which is this Ski School right here. If you log in here, you see a bunch of different classes. You can open up one of these classes. Each one has an address associated with it. It has the upcoming dates. It has class curriculum as a file that you can download. You can have photos uploaded, smart buttons up at the top for classes, teachers, invoices. I did this in about 20 minutes or so of a little bit of trial and error, but you can make a custom app pretty quickly, basically. I just want to spare you the trouble of watching me create this slowly over time. So yeah, there's a good example of it, basically, of things that you could do just using the tools in Odoo Studio. I didn't use any code or any development or anything like that. And just to keep things moving along, I'll move to the final step, which is just talking briefly about these other tools that we have. Access controls. So in Odoo Studio, you can access the access controls to modify user restrictions. And where you go to do that, if you open up, say, Contacts real quick, and you activate Studio, there's this option right here for access controls. It's really just for informational purposes, but also for some quick modifications. As you can see, there's different groups and there's different types of user access. There's just basic user, there's manager level. From here, you can toggle the ability to read, write, create, or delete. It doesn't get a lot more elaborate than that, but the use case is that if you want to, you might make it so that your users actually might have, maybe you want them to be able to delete records. You can go in with Odoo Studio and change that, and change the default rules, basically. You can create your own access control rules, but chances are it's going to require a little bit of code, or at least it's going to require our help, because a lot of times what it comes down to is you need to actually create a new group, and you need to actually go in and change the record rules for that group, and that gets a little bit more elaborate. It's a little bit beyond just simple drag and drop functionality of Studio. So right now I would say my advice for using access controls to Studio, it's really just playing around and manipulating these checkboxes the way they are. In sales, for example, you might want to make it so that somebody who is a manager has the ability to delete or has the ability to read and write, for example, and change some of these settings. Not really that much use for it beyond that, at least now in the current version of Studio. But that's what that is, in case you were wondering. And then automations. Automations, it's similar in the sense that there's some you can do with Odoo Studio that's really powerful, but once it gets past a certain level of complexity, it might require some code or it might require our use. What it's really good for is for automated emails being sent out based on an action, or for simply updating a stage or updating a record, moving it from a different stage in CRM, for example. I'll show you real quick what I mean. Basically, if we go into automations right here, it's really easy to make a automated action that is just based on a simple condition like when you create a new contact, let's just say. So when you're creating a new contact, you can have an action executed where it sends an email, and then you choose the email template, and you can send an email to your employees that say a new contact has been created. That's what you can do with Odoo Studio pretty well. Something where it's a very simple trigger and a pretty simple action, but it's still really powerful, especially for email alerts like this. Another one that you can do is you can also do an action of updating a record. Like I said, you can move basically the contact to a new stage. You can say, I want this stage to move to a new one when we create something. That you can all do without using code. Beyond that, though, most of these actions probably would require some degree of code, but at the very least, Studio gives you a shortcut to doing it pretty easily. So for example, execute Python code, or if you want to create a new record, for example, chances are you're going to need some code to do that. Contact us or your partner for more information on how to work with automated actions. I just wanted to kind of very briefly mention what it's good for in Studio and what its limitations are. Reports, and this is sort of the next big frontier for Odoo Studio. What we mean by reports is PDFs, printing out PDFs like printing an invoice or printing a purchase order. You can do a little bit with Odoo Studio with this, but this is what we're working on now for future releases to really improve this. You can do a little bit. So for example, if I jump into Odoo Studio and I jump into, say, the Help Desk app, which I don't have here right now. Let's say repairs. Okay, here we go. I was in the wrong demo database. Yeah, okay, so let's go to Help Desk. So Help Desk, if you're not familiar, it allows you to have tickets. It allows you to work with customer support and solve issues for customers. One thing it doesn't have, though, it doesn't have the ability to print a ticket. And this actually came up with a customer recently. For whatever reason, they wanted the ability to print a PDF document that they could print out and hand to their customer support team to work on. It's not in there, but with Studio, if you want to, you can actually go to reports, and you can create a new report to print out from this. My recommendation is do this one, this template. There's two ones. One is just completely blank that has your company footer and header. It's not that useful. And then the other one has the very basic information from that document. So if I choose that and close it, what you have now is you have a print option. So you're looking at this ticket, and it has some information like the name of the ticket, who it's assigned to. You can print it out as a PDF. Studio gives the ability to do that. However, the limitations are that you can't do much more than that. It's got the name of the ticket, it's got the name or the time that it was updated on, and it has your basic information. But it doesn't have a lot more information on here. To manipulate that, still you do kind of need to go into the XML or HTML views to modify that. But we're working on modifying that to have Odoo Studio give you more control over modifying reports. So stay tuned for that. That's kind of the next big frontier. If you've been with us for the last year or so, you'll see that Odoo Studio has actually gone through about 4 little updates along the way, and it's come a long way in a very short time. It didn't used to be so drag and drop. You used to have to basically hover over and select and then enter some code. It's really improved greatly, and we've added a lot of functionality. We're devoting a lot of our R&D resources to it, and I want to say thank you, R&D team, for getting us where it is now. To summarize, with Odoo Studio, you can do a lot. You can modify existing information. You can add new fields and new functionality, new connections. You can create whole new apps and new dashboard icons from scratch. And there's some extra functionality on top of that that you can do, like modifying access, automated actions, and to a certain extent, new printable PDFs and things like that. So yeah, at this time, we do have plenty of time left for your Q&A for questions. I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Todd to kind of manage that.
Sure, awesome. Well, first, thanks so much, Brett, for an incredibly in-depth and amazing presentation, as always. You know, here I'll bring up his information so you guys can see it right there. You know, if you want to schedule a demo with Brett, just go to odoo.com/r/Brett. So we do have quite a few questions, actually, Brett. First one is from Carlos J. Quintero. Can I install Odoo Studio in Odoo Enterprise versions on-premise?
That's a great question. So it is available for Odoo Enterprise on-premise, depending on the version. It's only available for version 10 and version 11 of the self-hosted enterprise or self-hosting. We've kind of changed the name of it. It used to be called Enterprise. Now it's really just Odoo self-hosting. But yeah, it's available for it if it's version 10 or version 11. The version 10 one is pretty limited, though, actually. Like I was talking about a second ago, the version 10 one doesn't have much drag and drop functionality. It's pretty limited, but it's still something. The version 11 one is pretty good, but you do have to install it, and the pricing model of self-hosting it now is that you do have to pay for it if you're going to include that. A next question that I'm seeing with Pablo is, can you make a website app with Odoo Studio? That's a great point. What are the limitations for Odoo Studio? Like where do we draw the line for what it can work on? That's really good to know. You can't use Odoo Studio for website functionality, really. It's different. Website involves HTML, it involves CSS, so at least currently, it doesn't really factor in. However, I should add real quick, Todd, is it still showing my screen?
Yeah, now it's showing your screen.
Okay, yeah, let me go ahead and show one thing that you can actually do. Sorry, I'm having problems with my screen. There we go. Okay, one thing that you can do that's actually really helpful that does relate directly to the website is you can create fields on the back end. If I go into CRM, for example, and I'm going to make a new file upload field on the opportunity, like here. So let's say that the use case here is that your customers can contact you through a website and you'll get a new opportunity or a new lead from it. And when they do that, they can submit some sort of a file, some sort of a document. You can have that show up on the website using the custom form builder on the website that we have. So I'll go into website real quick. I'll go to that and I'll go to the contact form builder, which is right here. Actually, I think I need to drag in the form builder real quick. There it is. If you're not familiar with the form builder, it's really cool. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a task off of this and save that. And from here, I'm going to choose existing fields. So you could choose existing fields or custom fields. As you can see, file upload. So some of the functionality of Studio is kind of on the website in terms of specifically the custom form builder. Or technically, any field that you've created on the back end, you can display as information only on the website if you want. But you can't create whole custom themes or whole custom modules or anything on the website. That's not what Studio is for. Other limitations of Studio, as far as Odoo is concerned, you can't use Studio on point of sale. Point of sale is actually developed in JavaScript. Studio is all Python. So you can't really do anything with point of sale with Odoo Studio. The other final thing is manufacturing, specifically the new work order steps screen. Odoo Studio doesn't affect that because that's also Java. I hope that answers your question a bit. Somebody asks, who is Odoo Studio best for? What kind of role would an Odoo Studio user probably have? Great question. Most commonly, Studio is used during the implementation phase of getting your platform up and running. So whoever the project manager is on your side of your company that is sort of facilitating the implementation on your end and getting data imported, getting things configured. So it could be your IT specialist. It could be your overall IT manager, something like that. Whoever is overseeing the creation of your Odoo database initially, generally Studio is good for them. We don't recommend that you give all of your users access to Studio because if they're messing around with fields and stuff, that's not good. But yeah, usually one or two IT admins, something like that. Maybe even the CEO if it's a small company and he's or she is in charge of running it. They might have access to Studio. As far as user roles, that's who it's best for. I hope that answers that question. Another question that we got is from Daniel Steinhauser, is what is the best practice to develop a new app or make changes in a test environment and then deploy it into the production database? Is there an export-import function? The answer is yes. It might require our help, but basically once you've created an app, you can export it. If you go to your list of apps and modules here, I believe it shows up here. Let me see. It should be, if we go to school. That's a good point. I might need to get back to you on can you just export a full custom module that you've created. A lot of times what we recommend is just do testing on a test database, make that custom app, and then if it works, then switch that to be your production database. You can do duplicates as many times as you want instead of exporting and importing. You should be able to export that custom module though. If you don't mind, I would say leave your email and we'll get back to you with an answer on that because that's a really good question. I want to know that too. You should be able to take a module like this that you've created and you should be able to export it. I don't know offhand how to do that, but I know there is a way. I hope that was, at least a half answer for you. Daniel also asked another couple questions. He asked, when I remove a field on a view, will the field also be removed from the model? In other words, will all the data be deleted, or is the model change persistent? Is there another undo operation when playing around? Yeah, so first off, there is an undo function. If I'm creating something in Studio, like a new field, and dropping it in there, here, I'll drop it in like so. You do have an undo option, which I didn't mention before, but you can undo it and it will remove it from the view, or remove that change. But what Daniel is kind of referring to is the remove view. So if I added it and I've made some change, you can click on it specifically in the future and you can scroll down to remove from view. This question is kind of what happens when you remove that. When I'm removing a field in the future, the field still technically exists. You can see it actually if I go into technical settings and you look at all of your fields that you've ever created. Any field that you've made with Studio, actually technically the back-end name of it, regardless of what label you give it, is going to be in this format where it's x_studio_field_ some gobbledygook. This gets generated by Odoo automatically. And here's the actual label that it appears. Here's the model that it appears on. So even if you remove it from view, it still exists in the system. If you really want to get rid of it, you would have to select it and get rid of it. Depending on it, though, if it's referenced somewhere, if there is actual data that exists, you might not be able to remove it so cleanly and so easily. So you might need to actually delete that, connect, whatever references there are first. If you delete the field and there is data associated with it, I'm 99% sure it removes that data as well. So chances are, if you remove it from view and you want to keep the data and maybe bring it back in the future, you wouldn't want to actually delete the field. Keep in mind, there's no limit on data in Odoo. Even if this might seem a little cluttered to you, it doesn't slow down performance to have a bunch of unused Studio fields. So in certain cases, it doesn't hurt to just keep that. I hope that helps answer that question a bit. Daniel's last question is, how robust are changes made with Studio concerning future Odoo versions? Will fields and relations added to a model and view remain after an update to a future version? Great question. That's an amazing one. And I'm glad you asked that because that kind of gets into the fact, or into the matter of Odoo Studio. Do you have to pay for it? And if so, how long? And the answer is, if you want your fields maintained, and if you want your fields updated in future versions and not erased when you migrate or when bug fixes are applied, you need to have Studio on your actual contract, because having that includes us on our end making sure that those fields get kept and don't get broken, and those connections don't get broken when you migrate and get moved to the new version. So that's one of the whole reasons why we justify keeping Studio on your contract after you're done using it. It allows us to take that into account. And what that actually means, it's actually kind of a manual process. It's our R&D team and our migration team looking at these fields that you've created when it comes time to update to a future version. And usually they test it on a test database first and make sure it works, and then it carries over properly. So I think that's another strength of Odoo Studio. It's not just that you're making these new fields real quickly and real easily. You're making them in a very safe way, in a very safe environment that is not going to break, and it's going to carry on to future versions. So yeah, thanks Daniel Steinhauser. Those are all really good questions, and I'm glad you asked them. Jamie Guerra asks, can you create fields not included in the original model? For example, a personalized region group on customers and contacts using Odoo Studio? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. You're creating fields that are not already in the original model. That's basically what you're doing when you are using Odoo Studio on contacts and you're creating new fields. You're creating new fields that weren't in the original model and you're adding them to that model. So what he's asking is, an example, a personalized region group on customers and contacts using Odoo Studio. And so yeah, you could do a quick text field for the region, and you're basically adding a new field that wasn't already there in the model. It's giving it a new Studio background. If you want to do a many-to-one field, though, where you're drawing from a list of data and you're choosing from a bunch of regions and you can specify the information on those regions, then you can actually create a model right then and there when you're doing that. Before, I selected an existing model, but you can just create a new one if you want to. And you can go ahead and enter that there and enter the model information right then and there as well. So it can get a lot more detailed than that. I hope that answers that question. Jamie also asked, what do you recommend when migrating to another Odoo version when you make a lot of modifications with Odoo Studio? Does the new version overwrite the modifications? And that actually was already asked by Daniel. Just to reiterate, migration, usually if you have a bunch of customizations in Studio, it could make the migration take a little longer. So usually when we're doing our migrations, like for example, when we're going to be moving people from version 10 to version 11 in the coming weeks, we're going to be probably migrating the people with the fewest number of modifications first, because it takes longer to factor in those customizations. But we do factor them in. They will get saved if they're done properly with Studio. Josh Ollie asks, in sales, the sales module, how can I link to the related purchase order when I select drop shipping on a sales order line? The source sale order shows on the purchase order in purchase module, but there's no link to a purchase order on the sales order. So I would have to probably explore this a little bit more and maybe consult somebody for advice on the best way to do it. But what he's kind of talking about is if you're doing drop shipping and you have a sale order, I would need to enable it first, actually, now that I realize it. But what ends up happening is you have a sale order, and then it's going to generate sort of a drop shipment. And it'll show you the delivery order, but it doesn't necessarily show you the purchase. To build that up, I think we would need to use a related field, actually. You'd need to use a related field where you're basing it off of the delivery. It could take a little bit to configure that, and I would probably make a few mistakes along the way. I would say contact me and we can set it up and we can talk about it one-on-one. I think the solution is basically you'll do a new related field, and that's that thing I showed you earlier, where you are going to show the purchase order that is based off of the delivery order. One challenge that could come up with that is that you might actually have multiple delivery orders. And if you have multiple delivery orders, you'll want to make sure that your related field is reflecting that properly and showing multiple purchase orders that are related to it. But I think that's going to be the solution. We're going to want to use a related field that automatically populates any purchase order that is generated off of the dropship delivery order. Like I said, reach out one-on-one and we can talk about it for sure. I hope that answers that question a bit. Final question, and then we should probably end it, right, Tom?
Yeah, definitely.
Jean-Philippe Moissy asks, hi, can we have automation for the quantity on hand? For instance, whenever a product is 0 on hand, send an email to a specific person or message. That is a really good question. I don't believe we could do it so simply, not the way you've described it. And the reason is a condition can't just happen when a quantity is 0. Because in simple programming terms, if the quantity is 0 and it sends an email, and then 5 minutes later the quantity is still 0, based on that logic, it would keep sending an email. So I think there'd probably be a little bit more to it than that. I don't think it would be that simple. You could perhaps have an automated action triggered based off of a reordering rule, because reordering rules are based off of minimum levels. So once it reaches that, we might be able to send something based on that reordering rule. I would say reach out to us directly and we can help configure an automated action based off of a reordering rule. I think that would be the secret to solving that. So yeah, I think that's all we have time for.
Absolutely. Well, Brett, thanks so much, as always, for spending the time to make such a killer presentation and going so in-depth with all the questions. As mentioned before here, I'm going to pull up Brett's information. Actually, would you mind pulling your email and stuff up so that way people can go check it out? Awesome. So if you want to get a demo from Brett directly, just go to www.odoo.com/r/Brett. And if you arrive late to this transmission, you can always use this URL to visit it at any time. And if you have an additional question, make sure that you send them to either Brett, which at bhy@odoo.com, or webinars@odoo.com, and we'll be sure to direct you to whoever can help you best, or help us if you can. And if you like this video, be sure to like it and subscribe down below. And with that, I think, thank you for your time. As always, we couldn't be here without our community. And have a good one. This is Odoo Live signing off.
Thanks, everybody.